Hello, welcome to Accounting with Mr. H. In this video, we're going to have a look at what has come up in past exam papers for AQA Accounting Paper 2 and perhaps try and make a few guesses about what might just come up in 2024. Please do subscribe to the channel, thank you if you already have, and remember to like, share, comment on the videos, let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Right then, here we go then. So here is the tracker that I've put together for paper 2 so we can see what has come up before and where it's been tested before. The yellow boxes are section A, so remember these are the shorter answer questions. They're often the 3-mark written one or the shorter answer calculate ones. Section B are the pink boxes. Section C are the 25-mark questions. And the blue boxes are the 6-mark written questions. As I said in the paper 1 video, I have no crystal ball, so at the end of the day, it's anybody's guess what might come up this year. But I think it's always worth just having a look and seeing what's come up before and perhaps what sort of things come up often and which sort of things haven't been in the exams for a while. And then you can read into that what you wish. So section 1 is tested in both paper 1 and paper 2. In paper 2, it hasn't come up the role of the accountant, accountants versus bookkeepers, financial accounting versus management accounting, but it has come up a couple of times in paper 1. Paper 2, types of business. Again, this topic is in both paper 1 and paper 2, and it's come up in various forms in paper 1. In paper 2, you can see there in 2020 there was a 25-mark written question, part of which involved discussion about whether a private limited company should become a public limited company. And in 2023 there was a short answer, a 3-mark I think it was, question just in section A about whether a sole trader should convert to a private limited company. So I would suggest perhaps those topics, types of business, perhaps not so likely to come up in paper 2, particularly as they just asked that little question last year, and they have come up in paper 1 as well. Sources of finance, though, is also part of section 2, and we can see they've never actually asked a sources of finance question sort of standalone in paper 2. Section 3, also in paper 1 and paper 2, the double entry model. Not a huge amount on this. They tend to like testing section 3 more in paper 1, but they do say it can be tested in both papers. So 2020 there was a calculate profit or loss on disposal question. 2021 there was some information and it required you recalculating the profit and the bank figures based on some additional information. It was also a sort of a cash versus profit type of question. And in 2022 they asked just for the non-current assets section of an SFP, where there'd been a purchase and a disposal of some non-current assets, and you had to recalculate the depreciation. Section 8, the analysis, so basically the ratios. Interestingly, not much happening here. So there was a little git question on gearing, calculate the gearing. A 6-marker about profit and liquidity. I think it was something about even though they've made a profit, why can't the owner take the drawings or something like that? And then there was a 3-mark written one on a limitation, or give a limitation of a ratio or ratio analysis rather. So not a huge amount with section 8. Section 9 is unique to paper 2, so budgeting. And apart from the very first year when the specs changed in 2019, in every year they have asked for a budget to be prepared. Sometimes section A, sometimes B. So if you look at the pattern, 2020 it was a cash budget, 2021 a labour budget, 2022 back to a cash budget, and then last year it was a budgeted income statement and a budgeted SFP. They've also tagged on some written questions with budgets, so ways to improve cash flow, benefit of a labour budget, usefulness of doing a budgeted SFP. 10 is marginal costing, which includes break even. And really, you can see there's quite a lot going on here. This is quite a heavily tested section. So it wouldn't be one that I would ignore because it seems to be a favourite. All the way back in 2019, it was all over the paper. a 3-marker on limitations of break even, a section B question, calculate the profit or the maximum profit. It was to do with optimum use of scarce resources. A 6-marker, should they use this new supply they've found to make up the shortfall? And then in section C, it was a 25-marker about whether a business should close a loss-making department. So really required you to think about the contribution. 2020, using marginal costing to accept additional work was a 25-mark question. 2021, there were some things on break even, a marginal costing statement, usefulness of break even. 22, using marginal costing to calculate a target profit, marginal costing as a means to set prices. And then last year there were some little questions on break even and margin of safety. But then there was a section C question, which it was essentially about a make or buy decision. So when you look at the topic of marginal costing, there's break even in it, but then it's also marginal costing as a means for decision making. And if you look at the list in the specification, it goes through all the different things, how it can be used for make or buy decisions, price setting, target profit, accepting additional work, closing a loss-making department, optimum use of scarce resources. And they've basically tested all of those things over the last 5 years. So is it worth looking to the early years, back to 2019, 2020? For example, the optimum use of scarce resources was all the way back in 2019. Is it time for that to come up again? Who knows? Section 11, standard costing. Again, quite popular. So back in 2019, calculate some variances and do a reconciliation statement and then analyse them. Not much nothing in 2020, or 2021 was just a little written 3-marker. Then 2022, calculate more variances and a reconciliation. How does standard costing help with motivation? 23 was a big 25-marker to do with variances and whether somebody who'd already interpreted them had done it right or whether you agreed with their interpretation. So again, quite a popular topic. Actually calculating variances as part or doing a reconciliation hasn't come up since 2022. So, is it time? Are they more or less doing it every other year? Who knows? Section 12, absorption activity based. So all the way back in 2019, calculate an overhead absorption rate. 2020, activity-based costing calculate question, and then a 6-marker, should they switch from ABC to absorption? 2021 was a little question on absorption costing in section A. 2022 was a 25-marker about switching to activity-based from marginal. 2023 was then a calculator on activity-based. So activity-based has been quite recent in a way, so absorption costing hasn't been tested in any particular big way since 2021, whereas they've done activity-based costing as a written one in 2022 and a little calculate in 2023. Or it might even have been a written one, I can't remember, but it's been a while since absorption costing came up in a big sort of question. Section 13, investment appraisal, fairly broad really. It's interesting that it's been in every year in one way or another, so it seems to be a bit of a favourite. So it started quite small, calculate NPV and payback, calculate net cash flow. Then they did 2 years running of 25-mark questions, which essentially were about analysing investments or projects and making some decisions based on the investment appraisal. And then last year it was back to some calculating NPV and payback, and whether or not or how we can use payback for decision making as a 6-mark written one. Section 17, remember that overlaps with paper 1 as well. They did the classic investor ratio question all the way back in 2019. That's one of their favourite 25 markers, although it tends to be tested more in paper 1. There was also in 2020 a little calculate question in section A, which basically you needed to know the formula for interest cover to be able to rearrange the formula to work something out. And I've put part 2 there in 2020. One of the 25 markers in 2020 was to do with whether a company should change from a private limited to a public limited, but also whether they should introduce a computerized system of budgeting. So it sort of came into section 2 and 17. But then there's been nothing particularly notable in the last 3 years from section 17. And then section 18, ethics, again, that crosses over with paper 1. They like ethics in paper 1, and that has come up quite a few times in paper 1. But interestingly, you can see there, it did come up once as a 25 marker in 2021. I think one of the things just to consider, particularly with investor ratios and ethics and these bigger written questions on those topics, obviously when you come to do the paper 2 exam, you already will have seen the paper 1 exam. So, just start making some comparisons. If there isn't a big question or even a smaller question about investor ratios or ethics in your paper 1 exam, then, does that mean there may well be one in your paper 2 exam? Because they seem to quite like section 17 and 18 somewhere, either in paper 1 or 2, pretty much each year. Just a few other observations then, as I always say, and I've already said, I don't have any insight, so, don't take anything as read, but just some observations. There's never been a written question, and I've said this in the paper 1 exam as well for these first couple of topics, because these are the sections that cross over between the 2 papers. There's never been a written question on mortgages, ordinary shares, debentures. So I'd make sure I know the advantages, disadvantages of these things just in case. Written question on capital versus revenue expenditure income. Again, that could be in paper 1 or paper 2. But for example, a question might say something like, could be even a 3 marker or a 6 marker. Why is it important to distinguish between capital expenditure and revenue expenditure or something like that? Also in section 3, although they ask us to use lots of or know how to use lots of accounting concepts and apply them, there hasn't really been a question about why it's important to apply them. So, for example, why is it important to apply the accruals concept? Section 8, I think this is quite an interesting one. 8 is where all the ratios are, the profitability, liquidity, efficiency, capital structure ratios. And this is really lacking across the 2 papers over the last 5 years. There have been multiple choice questions where they've asked you to work out a ratio. And I suppose, they're quite low level, low stakes questions. But they haven't really gone big with section 8 in a section B, a 6 marker, even a 25 marker. So as always, remember the ratios aren't shown in the exam, the formulas. So it is quite an interesting one that they haven't turned section 8 into a section B or section C question particularly. So making sure you know those formulas. Section 9, purposes of budgeting. They've done a little bit on budgeting, the usefulness of certain budgets, but understanding the purpose of budgeting, or the difference between zero-based and incremental budgeting. That could be a nice little 3 marker or a 6 marker. And then section 17 and 18, I put this in my paper 1 video as well because these sections cross over. But don't forget in section 17, there is stakeholders and the importance of communicating with stakeholders. And then section 18, you are expected to know a bit about the frameworks and some of the professional bodies, such as the Finance Reporting Council. And that hasn't really come up in any particular notable way. And lastly then, just some observations on calculate questions. In fairness, they have tested quite a lot of the topics from paper 2 over the last 5 years, so it's tricky to spot very many missing things. If you look at the specification, which is what I've done and cross-referenced, section 3, again, obviously this is paper 1 as well, and I said this in the paper 1 video. They've never actually asked you to prepare a provision for depreciation account or indeed an inventory account. And an inventory account catches out quite a few people. So it's interesting that they've never done, I mean, it would probably only be in section A, but a little 3 or 4 mark question getting you to prepare an inventory account. So I'd just be double checking that I know how to do that. Section 8, I've already mentioned about the accounting ratios, but again, other than calculating gearing and the multiple choice questions, is it time that they asked you to do some calculating of several accounting ratios. So making sure you know those formulas. In terms of budgeting, section 9, they've tested cash budgets twice, labour budget once, and a forecast of budgeted income statement SFP once, only just last year. So other than just the odd bit in a multiple choice question, they haven't tested sales budgets, purchase budgets, or production budgets. I mean, in fairness, they are the easier budgets, so I suppose they might not want to give away too many marks, which is probably why they tend to do them in multiple choice questions. But they could twist it, they could complicate it in some way, they could throw it out as a little bit of a calculate question in section A. So I'd just be making sure again I know the structure of those three budgets. And then section 12, it does talk about in the specification being able to use activity-based costing or absorption costing to calculate a selling price. They've done it for activity-based, but not so much really for absorption costing. So the idea that you'd have to calculate the ORs and the overhead absorption rates, they've done that before in 2019, but then they haven't then asked you to use those overhead absorption rates along with the direct costs to calculate the total cost and then perhaps add a markup to get to the selling price. So that might be something just to be looking at. So bit mixed really for paper 2, but perhaps giving you some ideas of some things that might be worth thinking about in your revision. I hope that's been helpful then. Please do subscribe to the channel, like, share, comment, and let me know what you'd like to see in future videos.